Excited to be here today. My name is Lisa Schaefer, and I am with Jen Davis, and we are talking about a topic that is becoming important during October, which is, of course, Eldercare Month. And willing and excited to be able to ask some questions and learn a little bit more about your experience working with your mom
Mm.
and taking care of all of the things that were Carol during her end of life process. So, Jen, I know elder care is something that you're passionate about because of your experiences. So, you want to share a little bit about your story of how you became a subject matter expert in the
R
area of elder care?
Right, yeah, so thank you, and by the way, thank you for being here and doing
Yeah.
this. Each month we choose experts to come in and talk about the different topics, and, when we got to this topic, this was a topic, as you said, that was really important to me. I realized as we were going through it that I actually was the subject matter expert, and, like you said, I was the primary caregiver for my mom in her end of life. Wasn't a role I ever saw myself doing, hadn't planned on that. I can tell you that I think that the patience and kindness that I found to do it was literally a gift from God. I don't, mm, those were skills I didn't know I had, Lisa.
Yeah.
Um, and so what had happened was I had stepped out of my day-to-day role at Davis Ware, and my mom, there were some things going on with her that we just
Mhm.
couldn't figure out, and just weird things that were going on, and they just didn't make sense. And so we finally had gotten her into Mayo Clinic in, I guess it was maybe April of, so we had her for about a year and a half. And through the course of a bunch of doctoring, came to learn that she had a disease called progressive supra-nuclear palsy, which is a mouthful and
Yes, it is.
something I had, again, never heard of until she had gone through it. And in her experience, so it's in the family of Parkinson's, doesn't really show itself like Parkinson's in any way. Um, but through our process, basically found out that she was terminally ill. There was really no treatment. And at that moment, I just decided that, you know, I guess really what it came down to is maybe a little bit of arrogance that I thought I could take care of her better than anyone else,
Mhm.
and I certainly had the resources, and oddly, as timing would have it, I had the time. I've been busy my whole entire life, and for the first time in my life, I had nothing to do day to day, and and that became my job.
And you stepped in and, of course, looked at so many different options. And what were you thinking to yourself? And all of a sudden, you're faced with this type of diagnosis, and you're like, what do I do? I'm going to try to provide the best because it's mom.
Right,
You want to provide
right,
everything best for her because of what she's done for us. And so, what was your step? What did you
yeah.
do? How did you even come together with that
Yeah,
diagnosis?
there's just so many answers to that question.
Hmm.
The first question is it's very overwhelming. And
Yeah.
you're like, at the time they had told us that her disease was actually a really slow growing disease. And typically they would say that you could live 10 years with, 7 to 10 years with that disease. Unfortunately, by the time she was diagnosed, she was so high functioning that
Mm-hmm.
by the time she was diagnosed, they said she had probably already outlived the life expectancy of the disease.
Wow.
So, at that point in time, even though we were told that, when you know that you don't know what the end is, you don't know how long it's going to be. And so, in my head, my selfish version of that conversation was like, how long can I do this? How
Right.
long?
Right.
Because when you're caregiving, you're really on 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are, I mentioned to you last night when we were
Yeah.
chatting that when you're caregiving, every moment, subconsciously or consciously, you're wondering like, has she fallen? Has she eaten? Has she been bathed? What, is the caregiver going to show up? The caregiver show up? Did the caregiver take care of her? Is it a good caregiver? So
Yeah.
um you just are so it's so overwhelming to think about that. And then, you mentioned you want to take care of her because she's your mom,
Mm-hmm.
and that certainly is in top of mind. I have a very clear memory of when she first came to our house. I hadn't like touched my adult mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds like strange, or maybe that's not the case for everyone, but I remember watching my sister Molly like gently combing my mom's hair, And I just had this like overwhelming sense of like, oh, I need to learn to like touch my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And, and sadly you get to touch her in ways you
You weren't
wished
expecting to
you,
do that.
right.
Yes.
You were definitely not
Yes.
expecting.
Yes.
But I learned from that tiny little moment
Mm-hmm.
watching my sister, the like the gentleness and the love, um, it in just the process. And so, when I had to like bathe her in uncomfortable places,
Mm-hmm.
you start to think about it in the love. And for me, I just thought, I kept thinking like, gosh, I hope somebody does this for me.
Right, right. Becomes so therapeutic, almost the therapeutic touch, and to be able to connect with her on ways you didn't, because
Right,
there's a difference between taking care of aging parents and taking care of parents who are getting sick and aging as well. So
right,
you
right,
had to really create an enlightenment of,
right.
wow. And what was the emotion like for you to do that? How did you kind of handle your own awareness and your own mental
Right.
health?
Yeah, I mean, just again, a million answers to the
Yeah.
questions. Like, there's not enough answers. So, I think that process was a lot of healing of, childhood wounds of
Mm-hmm.
things that just didn't go right.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of forgiveness and a lot of kindness that I probably didn't have going into it. And again, it came from God. There was
Mm-hmm.
no, the grace that I learned. Um, I don't it's inexplicable, is that the
Sure, we
it's
can use that.
it's, yeah,
Unexplainable.
yeah, unexplainable. It's unexplainable, and it
That
really,
works.
yeah, it was really unexplainable, and I remember different ones of my siblings being like, "How are you doing that?" Because, our moms are our moms, and, we don't have a lot of grace for our moms,
Mhm.
and that is something I think one of the mental health issues I probably dealt with throughout the whole process was realizing all of the times I didn't give my mom grace. And, just a kind of caveat to that, I remember one of my sister in laws quite a few years ago saying to me, like, you do know, like, your mom was doing the best she could do.
Yes.
And it just stuck with me. And so I also translated that into my own care for her when I would be upset that I didn't handle her properly or I didn't wipe her as kindly as I would have liked or, whatever it
Right.
was,
Right.
is, I was doing the best I could do.
Mhm.
And it was really hard, like
Yeah.
just to be super clear, there was nothing easy about the whole process.
No. Can imagine it would have been very tough as that caregiver, but you're so nurturing and you've had
Yeah,
such a huge family and a great experience. And I think it would just be natural for you to jump back into those maternal instincts to
right,
to care for your mom. But you're right, there's a lot of things that you have to let go of. And it's hard to watch. Your mother was vibrant. She walked into a room and was like lighting the place on fire.
right.
So to
Yeah,
watch the progression and losing what she was, it's like you're grieving constantly
yeah,
of what was and now what is and now what is going to be. So,
right,
as a caregiver, it is tough. It's got to be hard to watch that progression. What
right.
advice would you give looking back on it now that's helped you kind of accept it and move through it?
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's really big. When
Mhm.
I remember being so overwhelmed at the thought of, and I know this sounds terrible, but like, am I going to have to do this for 6 months or 6 years or the rest of my life? Like
Right.
to me, it was such a hard job that felt very overwhelming. So I think the first piece of advice is just take it one day at a time and stay in the moment because, after she passed away, there was so many thoughts that I was like, I could have done that overnight shift, or I should have gone down and slept with her. My mom, I don't remember snuggling up with my mom in bed like as a child
Right.
or whatever, but when I was caregiving for her, different times she would say, "Can you come sleep with me?" And most of the time I would,
Yeah.
but there was times when life was in the way, and in hindsight, I certainly probably could have done that more and done more in those ways. So I think, the first piece of advice is just stay in the moment so
Yeah.
that you're not overwhelmed by all of the things that are coming. And then the second one is going to be a little bit contradictory to what I just said, but give yourself grace.
Yeah.
Actually, it makes me cry because it was
Had to have been really tough.
It was really hard, and
Mhm.
um, you just want to do it perfectly, and
Mhm.
there is no perfect. It's you
Yeah.
do the best you can do in that circumstance, and so
It's amazing how advice comes back to us. You did the best you could with what you had.
that 100%. And
Mhm.
and then I have now learned. So a strange thing that happened in my life. I wanted to be a Eucharistic minister. I think you're a Eucharistic minister too, right?
I just read at church.
Oh, you
They
read.
don't,
Okay,
yeah, they don't
okay.
let me do that other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
That's,
that's okay.
I get one job.
You're
That's
not in
it.
the kitchen.
Nope, I'm not
Uh,
in the kitchen. Stay out of it. It just comes with
right.
the house.
Right. But I decided that was a calling that I wanted to do for a long time. Ended up getting involved in it probably 2 decades ago, so quite a while ago. But I wanted to go do home care, and that was how I had dreamed about it. I ended up getting assigned to a nursing home, and I was really unhappy about it. Honestly, I was kind of like, okay, I get to volunteer and they get to pick, and so I got assigned to the nursing home, and it was just delightful. And I absolutely found a passion that I didn't know I had. I actually thought I hated old people,
Mhm.
and then I loved that. And now fast forward those skills uh, applied to my mom
Yeah.
and doing that caregiving.
Isn't it amazing how you're placed in journeys early on to prepare you for your future? It's just
Boy, it
always
is.
amazing.
Boy, that is that
Mhm.
is absolutely the case. So
Mhm.
yeah,
I love that. That's a great piece of advice to really, look at today. You just have right now. Sometimes
right,
we say just manage the hour if you
yeah,
need, manage the minute
right,
if you need. And it can be very overwhelming if you allow that story to continue. But I love that you were reframing your story of I'm trying to provide great care for her as best as
right,
possible and, just one day at a time.
right. And I think the other thing that I want to mention uh, is when you're in that role, everyone in the world has an opinion
Oh
about
yeah.
what you're doing. And I remember, my mom, as you said, she was full of life. She
Hmm.
loved to travel.
Hmm.
My kids called her Go Go Grandma
Oh
because
yeah. Perfect name.
she never stopped. Well, my mom literally has a death sentence, and the world is trying to tell me, oh, she might get sick, she might get COVID, she might, you shouldn't really have her on those airplanes. And I'm like, have you noticed she's actually dying? Like,
Yeah.
she's dying. So,
You're not going to prevent it.
right, if she gets COVID and dies, she died doing what she wanted to do. And so there's so many people out there with
Yeah.
opinions. And if you just listen to your heart, you know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of the end of life that we gave her.
Right. Right.
Um,
You were taking her places. She was in pools. I'm like, you go, Carol. But again, I think you were living her personality.
mhm,
She wanted to do these types of things. She was full of life and vibrant. And what a great way that you could provide that for her, and to continue to help support her in that.
right.
So when you are looking at logistics, and I know you're very good at logistics and creating care plans is something that is kind of probably new to you in your logistics world, but what advice would you give just on like the day to day? How do you manage this? Is there
Right.
plans that you put together? What advice would you give on those types of things?
Right. Yeah. So when, we first got her diagnosis, the plan was not for her to come live with me. That wasn't, she was going to come for a month, and we were going to figure out the situation and get her diet and everything as well as we could to
Mm-hmm.
manage it. In the end, it is what it is. And, we sent her back home. She really wanted to be home. So we looked at different options. We looked at care facilities. We looked at all of the different agencies. And in the end, what I really realized is that people take care of people. People do things for people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I really needed to do was to create a network of people that would love my mom. And what I ended up doing was creating a handbook similar to my employee handbook. So, I literally took my Davis Ware employee
Mm-hmm.
handbook and kind of went through it and created a team because caregiving is a really, really hard job.
Yes.
And most of those women, I mean, hats off to we called it the Caring for Carol Care Team.
I love it.
Yeah,
I
so
love it.
I gave them a title. We had a team.
Nice.
But I did that because it's a really lonely job, and they're
Mm-hmm.
all working by themselves. And so I wanted them to feel like they were a part of something and make sure that they understood the importance of what we were doing. So I chose to go down the route of trying to bring a team together on our own. Everyone said it was impossible. And I think drown out the noise.
Right.
You'll hear that over and over again.
Mhm.
Everyone is going to tell you what can and can't be done.
Mhm.
So we put a team together. We had, at one point in time, we had about 18 women.
Okay.
So it was a big group. There was a core, call it 6 women that did the primary quantity of care. But for
Okay.
us, because she required 24-hour care, we had to make sure that I virtually had somebody with her all of the time. And then we went really non-traditional routes. So, we first went down the route of creating a structure and making sure that anybody we hired understood what the expectations were. So putting together how often she needed to be showered, how often she wanted her hair washed. In our case, we were very fortunate. My mom had done well for herself financially, and she had bought a long-term care policy. I probably in my younger years would have said she was nuts.
Mhm.
That long-term care policy allowed her to live her end of life,
Mhm.
to the best of
Right.
her ability. And so having, knowing with these caregivers, I don't want my mom sitting in bed. I
Right.
want they had the directive that she needed to be out and about every single day. So that's what my mom had always done.
Mhm.
And if it takes you 4 hours to get her in the car and back out, okay, it's half your shift.
Mhm. Yep.
That's okay. So, it was creating a structure, creating a team, and then hiring as many people as you can possibly find that are willing to do those roles and looking in really non-traditional places. So, we, Amy Bailey, which was the
Mhm.
primary caregiver. Well, actually, Paige Clower was
Mhm.
our first leader on that team, and then Amy stepped in toward the end. But each one of those had done some caregiving, but they had other roles and responsibilities. It
Right.
wasn't that they were just sitting, at the doorstep waiting for this job.
Right.
Um, we had a couple of our daughters take care of her. And then I relied upon my sisters. We
Mhm.
were very, very lucky. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and that huge group. Honestly, not everybody did everything, but everyone stepped in when we needed something.
Yeah.
So I can honestly say if, I guess I didn't ask my brothers to bathe my mom, but,
Mhm.
um, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I asked them to do the things that needed to get done, and they came through.
I love it. Kind of assigning the roles and setting up the expectations. You turned it into a leadership group. I love it, Jen.
Yeah.
It's, and again, but it's so important to be able to have the emotion, but then also be able to have the structure
Mhm,
and the pre plan. I
mhm.
mean, yay for Carol for really having foresight to say, hey,
Yeah,
I want to be able to support people in this.
right,
So I think that's one of the questions, too, that people always ask, you know, do you encourage your parents to look at having plans for
right.
their longevity? Do you have a conversation with your parents before this happens? Like, what advice would you give on the pre-planning of it and being aware of what potentially could happen?
Right. So I had 2 different experiences because my father passed away at 67. He was ill for just a few days, really, and passed away, and really nothing was in motion. And then on the flip side, my mom kind of had things buttoned up, and the earlier the better,
Mhm.
the more the better. We started going through her stuff and purging her things while she was still alive, and
Mm.
we did that together.
Yeah.
And some of it was emotional and hard. Some of it was actually really fun. I know I'm going to sound super morbid at this moment, but she and I went and picked out her casket
Mhm.
together, and I was testing them for her.
Yeah. What'd that feel like, Jen?
Creepy.
Yeah, I can imagine. How does
But
this look?
but it made her laugh, and
Yeah.
it brought light to a really sad situation.
Yeah.
But that's what we did, and I would just encourage people, have the hard conversations.
Right. Right.
Nothing. A gentleman by the name of Joe, who I used to work with, used to always tell us, good news doesn't get better, or bad news doesn't get better with time.
Right.
And nothing of that nature gets better the longer you wait. And you just never know. I mean, my dad he wanted to go rebuild in Iraq, and he was dead a month later.
Mhm.
So, uh, you just don't know.
Right.
And not that you have to be sitting on the edge of your rocking chair worrying, but certainly just knowing the things they wanted. She had her funeral planned out before she got sick, so
Mm-hmm.
that when she got sick, we went to the funeral home director. And when my mom passed away, our family had nothing to do but be together.
That's awesome.
And what a gift
Right. And that's totally what she would want. I
it
love
is.
that. That's
Yeah, a big
great.
old party.
But it's amazing to me that we have such a fear around death, and
Mhm.
we have such a stigma of, oh, let's not talk about that, or let's not experience the feels, or they're sick, let's not talk about their sickness. In reality, we should be talking about, what's happening and how do we support you and how do we connect and what can we do next. And I love the fact that you made it fun.
Right, right,
It's a celebration,
right,
but also it's a wow, what do I do? Because
right.
you're the one that's left behind,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, maybe I'm scared. What are my emotions? How do I work through that
Oh,
as
right.
well?
And I think I was probably taking care of myself at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't recognize it in those moments, but there's a lot to be said for walking through all of that reality as it's happening. And you mentioned the stigma and the
yeah,
fear around death. It's we shouldn't have, if we have faith, we have no fear of
exactly.
death. And I think it challenges your faith, certainly. But again, in the process, there's a song called Gentle Woman that they
Oh,
always play that my mom always loved. Like I remember her singing it when she was cooking and cleaning, and I just realized, like,
mhm.
in the process of her dying, that that was her theme song. And even though we saw her as this like firecracker in a room, at the end she was a very gentle woman. Like,
Mhm,
she had all these kids, and she was an amazing homemaker.
mhm,
In spite of the fact she had a career,
mhm.
she kind of did it all,
She did.
honestly. Yeah.
And you couldn't keep up to the woman. And I see a lot of Carol in you.
Oh
And
no.
again, it's like, wow, how do the pace that she kept, but still kindest woman you'd ever met.
Yeah.
Would do anything for anyone.
Right.
And so as you're looking at that yourself and, really emulating some of those positive characteristics, I love the fact that you could go through the grief cycle with her
Mm-hmm.
because she was grieving probably as well, but you were able to bond over
Mm-hmm.
that common
Yeah.
scenario and
Yeah.
really support each other through
Yeah,
that.
that is really actually true. And and we would say some inappropriate things,
Right?
certainly. I remember just different times we would be at restaurants or, flight attendants, and she'd be like, I'm almost dead.
And they look at her awkwardly like,
And,
"What? What's
and
happening?"
she's like, "No, I'm dying. I've got this terminal illness," and she would go through it. And so, those were funny moments. And
Yeah.
then, she would always say, "It's not fair. Like, I took good care of my health." I mean,
Yeah.
my mom wasn't on any medications really until the
Mhm.
last year of her life.
Yeah.
And so, she kept saying, "It's not fair. I don't want to live, I don't want to die at 80." I guess her
Mhm.
grandmother or I don't know, some women in her family died at 80, I guess. So she didn't want that. So there was a side of her that was mad about it.
Mhm.
And I don't know that my mom, I think, was mad like twice in my life. So I don't remember her having that emotion.
Right.
So she was mad for
Mhm.
sure. And it was really therapeutic to go through that time. Um, one of the things that you hear a lot right now about, euthanasia,
Right.
euthanization, and I would tell anyone, in those scenarios, is that end time is such a gift.
Right.
It was it was a time I wouldn't trade. It's something that was so valuable to me and to my family and to my kids. Having my
Yeah.
mom integrated into our home, uh, our kids got the opportunity to, actually, a couple of our daughters got to be caregivers,
Mhm.
and out of that they learned a love for caregiving, and they went on to do caregiving as their college jobs and summer jobs, because it is good money.
Mhm.
It's hard work, but it's good
Mhm.
money.
Mhm.
Mm.
Definitely hard work, but again, it's so needed because again, more and more we're seeing shortages of that
Mhm.
because, like you said, we're scared of aging. We
Yeah,
try to stay so youthful all the
yeah,
time, and
right,
it's like, no, embrace it.
right,
And how do we support each other as we move down the road of life
right,
and connecting that way? So as you're looking at yourself then, what did your mom teach you as we start to get older? Because, and like you said, in your 20s, you don't think about things, your 30s, your 40s, you start getting into your 50s. Do you have the discussion with your kids?
Yeah.
And as a caregiver, what did you learn from the experience that you want to be able to teach your children?
Right. So my mom was a hoarder, as many people know. So I immediately came home and have been purging ever since. So, we're 3 years into purging at my house. I will not have 78 black T-shirts in my closet.
How many quilts are you making out of those black T-shirts?
I don't know. Yeah. So, and again, we kind of made fun of it, but for me, definitely not wanting to leave that to my kids. And honestly, my parents both actually did a pretty good job of that, but we all love our things, right? So, interestingly, one of our daughters said to me, "Mom, you must be really scared of dying because you talk about it all the time." And I said, "No, it's actually the opposite.
Right.
It's that we should talk about it."
Yeah.
And I don't know that that ever happened pre taking care of my mom. But you do start to think about it. And there's sad moments that I think about, gosh, what would this situation be like without me in it? And I guess that's selfish. But you don't want your kids to go through that. The heartache that I have being an orphan now and no parents, you don't want your kids to have that.
Right. You want to make that easy as best as possible for
Right.
everybody. Love
Right.
it. So I don't think that's selfish. It's just
Yeah,
realistic
yeah, right.
in setting that tone. So I would ask you, you did a great job of really putting together a team and really kind of coordinating the efforts of that. What did you do for self-care? Because a lot of times what we read in the statistics is the caretaker doesn't take care of themselves. They don't go to their own doctor's appointments. They don't eat as healthy as they could. They don't exercise as often. What would you give as advice for self-care for the caretaker to keep yourself, uplifted?
Right. No, and that was really hard. I mean, I gained a lot of weight taking care of her. I left behind a lot of my day-to-day habits. And certainly, I think it's just a trap that we kind of put ourselves into. The things that I definitely was good about was knowing, like, when I was tired, when we're tired, we're cranky, right? So
Right.
I would just make sure that most of the nights I would get a caregiver to stay overnight with her, and I would go to my own bed and sleep with my own husband in my own routine. It didn't necessarily often give me the quality of sleep that I wanted because if I could feel her, I knew she was fine.
Yeah.
But definitely that was probably the area that I really made sure of. Again, we were fortunate, Lisa, because my mom had taken care of the situation financially.
Right.
So many people don't have that luxury. So I would say if you can afford to have overnight care, that was huge because if you don't get sleep, you're just miserable.
Right.
And so those were the times. There was a 2-week period of time that I did everything myself. I had her 24/7, grueling. And then the other thing is just asking for help. I had a girlfriend who, I said, "Can you just come over and sit with my mom for a couple of hours so I can go run errands?" People will do that.
Yes.
There's a world full of people who will help if you just ask. And somebody really wise once told me, "Don't ask how, ask who." And I really took that advice to heart.
Yeah. And I think that's key because we're always the helping type. Jen, I can help you, but we never ask for it ourselves. And self-care for caretaking, I think that's when you do have to let go of this guilty feeling or this story that I have to be everything to everybody, and just take care of yourself. I
Right.
mean, we hear it all the time. I was just on a plane yesterday to, put your mask on yourself first
Right.
before taking care of somebody else. But it's hard to ask. And then it's like, is mom going to be okay with that? What if it's a stranger? And we get into the what ifs.
Right.
But being able to do that, I think, is key for a
Well,
caretaker.
And for me, one of the scenarios was we were doctoring up at Mayo, which is, it's about probably a 5 or 6 hour drive. Huge commitment to be up there. You don't know when you're coming back. And one of her series of doctor's appointments, I just needed to be home. I had a bunch of kids that needed me. It was really my kids that needed me, and I was trying to debate, like, do I take care of my mom or my kids?
Yeah.
Who do you go save? And at that moment, I decided to call in my siblings, and I asked actually my brother Jerry. I said I asked my sisters, but he is the one brother that stepped up, and he went up to Mayo, and a couple of my sisters, and they all separated. They divided and conquered that time up there. And, really, I realized in hindsight that that was a gift to them.
Hmm.
At the time, I'm sure they were like, oh gosh, I wish she could do it. But,
Right.
uh, they got that opportunity. So all of the time that I spent with my mom by asking others to help her, I gifted that time to them
Hmm.
too.
I love it. I love it. So I think those are some key great pieces. If you were to kind of look at the whole experience,
Mhm.
coming back at it again, is there anything you would have given yourself as advice prior to it, besides the things you've already shared, asking for help, making sure that you're taking care of yourself as well? As you look back, anything that you would give as kind of that piece of advice to people that aren't even experiencing this yet?
Right. I mentioned this again earlier is I we just don't even I never considered that I would be my mom's caregiver. Not in a million years. It didn't even cross my mind that my mom would need caregiving. And so to me, I think that's the one thing is just to start to frame that reality that our parents will age and someone likely is going to have to step into that role, and having a plan around what that could be, or starting to visualize what that could be, I think is important. Now, Dan and I, when we built the house, we knew that, we have 20 brothers and sisters. So we were like, okay, our parents are probably, somebody at some point in time is going to need us. And
Right.
so we put a first floor bedroom and bathroom in our house. And so I think that was thoughtful, because
Mm-hmm.
certainly it would have been impossible.
Right.
And if you have the opportunity to think ahead in that way, certainly doing it. But, outside of that, I think it's just setting your own expectation
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that the difference between what happened and what I anticipated were entirely different.
Isn't that amazing how that works?
Yeah.
You just plan for everything and then just reality sets in and that the plan
Yeah.
goes another
Right.
direction
Right.
and we adapt. And I
Right.
think what I'm hearing you say is adaptability is key, but then also having the foresight to be able to know that, we are one day closer to,
Right.
60, 70, 80, and how do we best plan
Right.
for that?
Well, and you start to think about your own morbidity, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
and I know, and right or wrong, but it's like the next generation's ticket is up.
Mm-hmm.
Like my parents are both gone, so
Mm-hmm.
next on the next on the docket is my group, and so you do think about that, and we all are selfish at some level, or
Yeah.
self-absorbed, and I thought about that a lot, and there's been many, many days when I'm praying that somebody will do what I did for my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe, was it selfish to say I did it for her, hoping, it would be extended to me? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but that thought certainly has crossed my mind.
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest fears, like what does happen to me? Who is going to take care of me?
Mhm.
And where do I go next kind of
Right,
thing. And that's again the anxiety of the future.
right,
And but again, having those dialogues and those discussions and having a plan, I think is one of the most important things.
right,
So as you wrote down some of those care plans and some of these, handbooks, and if somebody's trying to coordinate a team similar,
right,
where would you have them start logistically? And because you've been blessed and have a lot of great experiences and a lot of
right.
skills in that area, are there strategies that you would recommend in developing care
Yeah.
plans or?
Honestly, it was really hard. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this topic for our community was the information isn't out there.
Right.
So, asked a lot of questions. I talked to as many people as I could find and think of who had been through it, and asked a lot of those questions. I asked the care teams a lot of questions
Okay.
and made sure that I was, thinking about things and asking the right questions. I was really blessed to have a bunch of opinionated women, to be honest with you. But I say that with absolute love
Yes.
because they had opinions on what was safe and what wasn't safe. And, the whole, pardon my French, the bullshit around let's
Right.
be safe. Let's not put safety in front of living life. And so that was a really hard balance. The number of conversations that I had with all of the experts who were telling me not to do all the things I had done.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, that might work for other people, but not for me and not
Yeah.
for my mom.
Yeah.
And so the advice is really ask lots of questions and get lots of information, but be very selective on what advice that you bring in.
Sure. So, did you have any agencies that like Center of Aging, or did you have any like hospice types of
Mm.
recommendations, or did you even say, "Hey, we better talk to a lawyer about some of these things"? Any advice you give on again
Mm.
that logistics piece of it? Because where do you even start? Like, who
Right.
you say ask a lot of people. Who do I even ask? I don't even know
Hmm.
where to go. So,
Right.
any advice on like agencies or people that you ask those questions of?
Yeah. So my sisters and I, so there's the four of us. We kind of divided the responsibilities. So my sister Melissa handled all of like the doctor's appointments and getting those all scheduled and on the calendar so that even though I was taking her, she made sure all of the records were there and everything that needed to be done. My sister Molly was living with her at the time or, managing her house.
Mhm.
So that was kind of her responsibility. And then my sister Missy or Michelle was responsible for like contacting all the agencies and trying to find out what options there were. To be
Awesome.
totally candid with you, the agencies were generally very unhelpful
Okay.
because the the red tape you needed to get through to
Right.
get any help was just really exhaustive. We did have therapy coming into her house, so
Okay.
we had them come in. I would say they didn't really provide a whole lot of value.
Okay.
They mostly just gave her something to do. I wanted her to feel busy. So I
Right.
wanted her to feel like she had all these appointments. And so she had physical therapy, she had music therapy. And then we did get an agency from the county to come in and do her bathing and her
Okay.
showers. And so what all of those agencies, nobody helped us with that other than people that had already been through it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I mentioned asking people who have gone through it what worked for them, who helped them, because that was really, that was kind of where we found help was
Right.
other people who had lived it. And then, probably most of the government opportunities that we had or agency opportunities really didn't help a tremendous amount. The showering was huge. That was
Sure.
a really, really big one, to try to take that off the plate of the people who were caregiving for her. Um,
Yeah. Well, and I love the fact that, you're looking for people that had that shared experience.
mhm.
Um, do you know of any like caretaker support groups or anything in your adventures that you reached out to be able to say, "Hey, can we just get some support for each other?"
Right. Unfortunately, no,
Okay.
I
So what
didn't.
I'm hearing you say is there's an opportunity to
There's an
support
opportunity. Yeah.
support caretaker
Yeah.
group. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now we created our own. There was
yes.
a group text message that we kept running the whole time and would share, the funny stories, the bathroom explosions, the things we didn't
Yeah.
want to talk about,
Yeah.
and the hard conversations. And certainly that team was just so important. And to this day, each one of those women, I have such a love. I mean, it just deep in my soul for them for caring for my mom. And and I had a lot of conversations with them, but certainly we became our own care group because they're
Hmm.
just, in my opinion, or in my journey, there wasn't one.
It wasn't that availability.
Yeah.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
and there's a lot of conversation around hospice. So
Right.
and in the very end we did put my mom in hospice. I will be candid. It wasn't a great experience.
Hmm.
There was a lot of well, she's dying. Like, I know, like, but she's
Right.
still living.
Right. Yeah. She's
So
not dead
she's not
yet.
dead yet.
Yeah.
And I just didn't like that. I
Yeah.
felt like the default was to get her to the grave as fast as possible.
Okay.
And that just wasn't going to work for us.
Right.
And
Right.
so, um, you know, that was what it was. And in the end, maybe about a month before she passed away, she had a UTI. Oh, it was Easter actually. She had a UTI, and the whole attitude about it was just like, well, this happened. Like,
No.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm not going to let my mom be miserable. And
Hmm.
so we ended up doing some care that was probably out of the guidelines of hospice. And
Hmm.
they mentioned, well, you might get kicked out of hospice. Okay, so
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
like that's okay.
Well, I loved you had this common mission though of here's what mom is,
Hmm.
here's what mom needs, and you're right. There's a lot of noise out there, but there's a lot of noise for parents. There's a lot of noise for everyone.
There is,
Everybody's got an opinion on something.
right,
But I love that you had the shared mission of what does mom want,
right,
and how
right.
do I keep life normal for her? And I think that's the key to success as a caregiver.
And Lisa, we wrote a mission statement.
That's
So
awesome.
our team
Shared
had a
mission.
mission statement around my mom, and it was to create the highest quality of life possible up until the very end, and to create that experience for her. And so if there's advice out there, create a mission statement
Yeah.
and hold yourself accountable to it, so that when you start beating yourself up because somebody on an airplane complained that she didn't have a mask on, or somebody's complaining that, you're driving recklessly with the wheelchair. Yeah, we were actually.
Because we were having fun. It's
Right.
Carol.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Right. All of those things, when you tie it back
Right,
to,
right.
what she wanted to live. She didn't want to be preserved.
Mhm. Exactly. Live like you're dying. Great
Hmm.
song,
Yeah,
but again, yeah,
there's a,
definitely making that happen.
there's a lot of wisdom there.
There is definitely. Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience, and I know everybody's journey is just a tad bit different, but we all have similar things in common. Love the fact that you said, ask who can help us
Hmm.
and who does have the compassion and the love for the people that you're caring for,
Right,
and then also taking care of yourself.
right.
I mean, again, self care is so important for the caregiver, but we sometimes forget that.
Hmm.
So, with October being caretaker month and really looking at that, one last thing that you want the community to know in this adventure
Yeah.
that you think would help them be successful.
Yeah, I think no one wants no no one wants the sentence of terminal illness, certainly, and definitely not for our parents. But for me, it was such a gift. I wouldn't trade those moments for anything. And you know, life was designed perfectly, and God gives us everything that we need. And so, especially in that journey, the greatest care I could have given myself was being involved and being present with her care. And so don't rob yourself of that. And just allow yourself to be present, because you will never regret. And that was one of the songs I kept playing in my head. If I was like, okay, do I, go read a book, or do I go sit with mom? And I'm like, okay, I'll never regret going to sit with mom. And so, I just did. And are there times that I didn't do maybe what I should have? I'm sure. But in the end, I feel like it was such a gift to have that year and a half with my mom.
Love it. So, Jen, one of the things that we've kind of discussed is looking at, that whole future planning. Do you think parents are selfish if they don't plan or
Mhm.
don't start the dialogue with their kids? What's your thoughts on that?
It's funny because I think in general, as parents, we don't want to have those hard conversations because we don't want our kids to have to worry about it or think about it. But I do. I actually think, if we really are being responsible parents, we as parents, we want to do everything for our kids. We want to help them in any way possible. So why not help them in what will be the hardest days of their lives, and by having things in order? And my mom had things quite in order even before I got involved. So I was really grateful for that. But yeah, have the hard conversations. It doesn't get easier once you're gone. And when my mom died, our siblings just got to be together. We didn't have to figure out the casket and figure out the readings and figure out who's going to do what. Everything had been bought, paid for, it was done. And so, that was the best gift my mom could have given us.
Which is great because, again, like you said, during that grieving process, the last thing you want to worry about is what song you need to pick out.
Right,
And of course, there's always different belief systems around that. Well, that's where the family comes together and plans
right,
these things. But I love the fact that, she had it all figured out for you
right.
and it made it easy.
It did make it, I mean, it made it easier. I don't know that it
Mhm.
was easy, but we did override her clothing choice. We have
Well,
to
there
be
you go.
honest.
So that's okay.
Yeah, my sister Melissa, she went to go drop it off at the funeral home, and she was like, "Jen, it was just too ugly.
She couldn't do it.
I couldn't do it." So
It was
that
probably
was, we
comfortable.
all we all got a little chuckle out of
Oh,
that. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. I love
that
it.
was funny.
So, as you're also talking about really planning ahead, one of the things that come to mind is when do you get a lawyer involved?
Mhm.
Like, what is the steps that you took in maybe setting up things? If your mom didn't have it as structured, would you give advice on when to seek out outside counsel?
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. So we were very, very fortunate that my mom, I mean, I talked to her 45 seconds before she died. So like she had her wits about her up until the very end. So the sooner the better on really everything as it comes to that. So in my case, my mom had put a will together. She had a will, she had all of the power of attorneys in place. Um, I became her medical power of attorney, and then I became, I don't know what the role is, but I did her finances while she was alive. And then my brother Mark is was her executor to her will. And so we wanted to make sure we both had a really clean handoff
Right.
and really understood what our different roles were, in that process. And so we took my mom to her lawyer probably a year before she died, and kind of went through everything and really allowed her to express what it was her desires were. Because, and again, we really had no problems whatsoever, but I can imagine situations where there's family tension.
Mhm.
Not having an outside third party there, her lawyer heard from her lips, as did we, exactly what my mom wanted. And the things that my mom was a little bit misguided or, had some different beliefs, the four of us were able to work together and come to a consensus on, how that might work or whatnot. And so, I think it's just so important early, 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 early.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the answer.
I love it. Well, and then again, it helps you know what your roles are. And so your role was kind of the medical piece. So is that what kind of led you to deciding that you were going to be the primary caretaker? Or what was the story behind you appointing yourself as kind of this is the person or this
Right.
is the role I'm going to take?
Right. And I may have said this earlier. I didn't ever think I would ever be my mom's caregiver. So to be super clear, if there's people out there that are like, well, that's not for me, it wasn't for me either. That wasn't a
Yeah.
role I saw myself in. And I think I am, I'm a problem solver and I want to solve problems. So, I got involved in the beginning simply because nobody could figure out what was going on with my mom. They said, she had cataracts. They did cataract surgery and nothing was better. They said she had Parkinson's disease and they did all these tests and so they kept going down all these rabbit holes. And so I guess, I wanted to go solve that problem.
Hmm.
And so in the beginning, it was simply, I'm just going to get involved and solve this. And then she'll go back to her home and, my sister Molly will take care of her. And
Hmm.
and then as time went on and the situation unfolded, it became very clear that my sister with two small children and her own health issues certainly could
Hmm.
not take care of my mom. And then it started, it was evident. It was my kids were grown, or mostly grown, and I had the ability to do it. So I don't know that I set out to be her caregiver. I think it's just life happened
Hmm.
and it just became what it was.
Hmm. Love it. Well, and again, you're right. You don't plan for these types of things. It just progresses.
Hmm.
And to be okay with the progression
Yeah.
and making that happen. So, as a caretaker, there are apps out there that you would recommend or things that you say, hey, former or other caretakers, here's some things that I think have helped us electronically.
Yeah. The one thing that we used was it was called Sling Schedule, and we'll put a link to it in the um, in this um, content. We'll put a link to it in the content, but Sling schedule was basically the way that all of the caregivers were assigned shifts. It was how we all communicated as to who was on shift. It was how I did the payroll and made sure that that was all done. And it was a marvelous, marvelous software. Now, ironically, I spent 30 years in dispatching software, so it was kind of right up my alley.
Right.
It was remarkable and really was a game changer. So, if there's one tool, one piece of advice, even if you aren't doing paid caregiving, even if it's just family caregiving, it's very easy to block out your availability. It was very easy to see who's available to schedule. It was easy to take shifts, and we made some adjustments as we went, but what a phenomenal tool to make sure that she was taken care of. And then outside of that, we did a lot of things there was an app that we used to manage kind of her exercise program.
Okay.
So, and I don't recall what the app was, but that was also super helpful because it made sure that the caregivers got done what needed to get done. Because at the end of the day, she was my mom, she wasn't their mom.
Right.
And they had their own lives. And if their own responsibilities were overwhelming, then they may not have brought their best self to their job. And so, you want to give them lots of grace and lots of empathy, but also make sure that they are getting paid to take care of my mom.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure she got her money's worth
Right.
and what was happening.
And setting those expectations early of each of the roles. And,
Yeah.
like you said, here's what we were doing with our mission statement with
Yeah.
mom, I think is key. So glad to hear that there are apps out there to support that and make it a little bit easier that way.
Right. And we did a Sunday night roundup or a Sunday night
Sure.
recap where we would meet and the caregivers for that week would be on that call. And I did it on video because, again, I wanted everybody to feel a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And hopefully I think they all felt that way and we're grateful for that.
Love it. Great tools to use and great pieces of advice. I do want to just highlight we've been given some great resources and statistics, so I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts on this. Right now, there is AARP's whole comment out there. They did an updated Valuing the Invaluable report, and what they're saying is family caregivers provided 36 billion hours of unpaid care worth over $600 billion in 2021. So as you're looking at the future of kind of this whole system of what you did with your mom, what are your thoughts on some of these kind of statistics? That's a lot of money that's being unpaid care.
Right, right. Well, and Lisa, if you look at all of the scenarios of even society, the answer in everything is family.
Mm.
Really, and it is. And what historically happened was the elderly were a part of the families. And the Amish have the Dottie house, which is the parents living and connected to the family. And so, I think there's so much wisdom. All of the answers to tomorrow's problems are in yesterday's history. And so having them with your family, you are gaining just as much as they are getting.
Right, right. And I think that's something too that we need to cherish as well. And different belief systems in different cultures definitely generate different processes in how we treat
Correct.
our
Yeah.
elderly. So
Right.
I love that. Other statistics, I think this is really interesting as well. Parents receive most care from daughters.
Mhm. Yeah.
Again, sometimes it's a different approach. I know women are often seen as nurturing and,
Right.
kind of the caretakers, and now you have to mother your mother.
Right.
So that transition. Any thoughts on that one?
I can tell you, and this might not be fair to my brother. Sorry, guys. Is the thought of them taking care of my mother? Like, no.
Right?
I can't have it. And my brother Jerry, God bless him. I mean, he came and
Yeah.
he towed the line and he came and did it. But I can tell you, it was literally because I had nothing left in the tank. I had no other choice. And and in a sad way, I guess I would have stolen that opportunity from
Right.
him. He now looks back at that situation with love and with it was a good experience for him. But no, I want my I wanted to take care of my
Yeah.
mom, and if it wasn't me, it was my sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always interesting to me that becomes kind of that feminine role that we have in society, which is very common. 47% of working caregivers report having to use up their own savings. Any thoughts on that one?
Wow.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. It's half. I mean, that's half, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, my thought is that we as parents of the children need to make sure that we don't put our kids in those positions. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably the lesson learned, is that, again, if we're really trying to make sure that we're taking care of our kids in the best way possible, we have to make sure that we do for our kids what my mom did, certainly for us. And
Yes. Definitely set that plan up and
yeah,
help people moving forward.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and we mentioned this earlier, and I just want to kind of again give some of these statistics that are coming out. And of course, you will definitely be posting these resources and articles available under the content. But 72% of family caregivers report not going to the doctor as often as they should. 55% say they are skipping their own doctor's appointments for themselves. 63% of caregivers report poor eating habits compared to non-givers, and 58% report worse exercise habits than before caregiving responsibilities. So October being, of course, that elder care approach, and I am a strong proponent always of self-care. It's not just always bubble baths and chocolate cake. Self-care is so important to continue to do, and you've given some great advice. Any last piece of advice on that self-care?
So all of those, I was part of that statistic. So I didn't go to the doctor as much. My got through the year. My massage membership had 12 open, tags. I hadn't gone back, and it is hard. So I think it is self-care also to be okay with letting some of that stuff slide.
Yes.
So if it creates more stress for you to do those things, then it creates outcome, then it's okay. Like it's okay. Not that I'm condoning don't go to the doctor, but
Right.
my dermatologist appointment, it can wait. Like it wasn't that important.
Wasn't a priority
Right,
or a
right.
priority.
And so, if it creates more stress, self-care isn't defined by someone else. And
Correct.
so you get to define it. And for me, giving up a lot of those things, it was okay.
It was just a temporary delay.
Right, right.
Love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Well, thanks so much again for being here. Appreciate the conversation as always. And thanks for what you've done to help educate the community on some of the steps
Yeah.
to take as caretakers.
Thank you.